Welcome back to the second part of our webinar.
Let's jump into the foreign, the US's hostile foreign policy with respect to the Ethiopia. But when you look at through, that hidden lines, you identify those things. For example, it's continued to undermine the foreign policy, continue to undermine the sovereignty of African and African nations, particularly in Ethiopia, in particularly following, this like in 1976, Ethiopia basically became the proxy between the Russia and the United States. Fast forward, how many years now? 2021, the same, Ethiopia again find itself the tension between America and China. We're talking about those larger, bigger, pieces. So continuously, Secretary Blinken is basically finger pointing. You know what his rhetoric is? It's been accusatory. It's only sanctionist approach to just, Amhara militia, Ethiopia, Eritrea government, do this, this kind of ultimatum. So those things are really becoming very belligerent in their acts. By the way, he voted for the invasion of Iraq. He also voted for the bombardment of Yemen by the Saudi Arabia and also the breakdown of Libya. So where does this end? Do you think ultimately NATO, we end up seeing NATO burst around Ethiopia? Because Ethiopians are saying, that's like a while ago, as we talked about, like Melis, Abiy is probably saying, no, you're not going to have a puppet leader in here. So those kind of things, where do you think would end up?
What scares me the most currently is it reminds me some of the projects that were planning to be built in Yemen. There was this major undertaking, I think by UAE, I believe, that a bridge that will connect the Africa continent with Yemen. And they were planning to create this mega city in both sides, and then the economic transfer and agriculture and all those kind of things. And you can't think with a war like the ravaged Yemen to do anything of that kind today. The issues in Libya, the issues in Syria, the issues in Iran, as we talked about, both Iran. The first Iran was Kuwait issue, the human rights crisis, the humanitarian crisis, and the attack of the military, which killed many Kuwaitians. And also the second Iraq war was about 9/11. And of course, later on, we found out that there was no any Al-Qaeda connection or weapon of mass destruction. And in Syria, and we have seen what has transpired since, and the reasoning behind it, of course, and Libya. And we can go back in history and we can call the Second World War, how America engaged in that war, the attack in Pearl Harbor, and you can go to Vietnam and see the similar kind of, as you have seen it in the fog of war. The Secretary of Defense McNamara came out and told us that he was wrong. There was no any the attack, So the reason how major wars begin in the world, especially when it involves America, is that it has an interest and an agenda that opens up this kind of conflicts. So what is happening in Ethiopia is not different. And as I tried to show a little bit earlier about this Red Sea arena that started in April, and that followed the current conflict. By the way, one of the things that that study, the main report suggests, is that it requests to institute an envoy for the Horn of Africa. And one of the persons who are the signatory of that document was Jeffrey Feltman. And the person who is now in charge and an envoy to the Horn of Africa is Jeffrey Feltman, and you can see the connections. And so this proxy that we're talking about for the China, and the China came out within the framework work of the current conflict in March 6th, the Ethiopian government and the Chinese government signed a contract, some kind of agreement, saying that the Chinese government will establish security safeguarding mechanisms for major projects under the Belt and Road initiatives in Ethiopia. And 3 days later, March 9th, Secretary Blinken tweeted saying that we will never hesitate to use force when American lives and vital interests are at stake. So what is the connection between the two? So this is how Cold War began. Of course, as Ann earlier said, that you can't galvanize that kind of military force and make the kind of show in a week. So that means that there is the preparation undergoing for a very long period of time. And how honors on the 4th of November, that when the TPLF attacked the Ethiopian military government, how honors that you come back with a report as scathing as the USIP's report that came out. So all these are the underlying factors that are happening in the region is bigger. And I think we need to be scared. We need to see what has happened in the past in these countries that followed, maybe didn't follow through properly or were ignored. And maybe this might be our turn. If this is our turn, how are we going to come out of it safe? If the economic boycott is going to be strong and come strong as it may, are we going to be, will we able to be resilient? And also, will we survive as Iranians are doing? Or are we going to debacle and collapse or be in devastating condition as the Sudanese? Or worse yet, are we going to be invaded and attacked, or our own brothers will be weaponized and used against to destabilize Ethiopia, as in Libya? And these are the options, the different scenarios that we can see, that we cannot ignore, that it is in our own interest to understand this. I want to believe that the current American administration or the previous one were mistaken about Ethiopia. And then we had 100 years of relationships, and we have had our good times and bad and worse times. And they have sabotaged our interests, and at the same time, we have had very fruitful collaborations. And we owe so many of the developments that Ethiopia now is proud of comes because of that kind of political connectivity and relationship that worked. But at the same time, I mean, so I don't want to. So these are our interests, and so the Ethiopian government has to continue to do what it does, that the bilateral relationships with the government, diplomatically or in any militaristically, in any other relationships that they have the line to connect with. But at the same time, our responsibility as citizens of this world is that we have to show what has happened in the past recent history of the world. And I don't want Ethiopia to become the next victim of this vicious cycle that we have been ignoring and that we have been seeing in other worlds. And at the same time, if after it happens, I don't think there is any way of to undo it, because it's a very, the devastation, I don't think we can afford to survive with it.
Yeah, so let me pick up on that last sentence. I don't think we can afford to let it advance anymore as well, because these things are very difficult to unravel afterwards. Look what happened in Sudan. So I think in addition to the effective diplomacy, the effective strategic communications, the efforts to push forward reconciliation, we've got to break the polarized debate. We have got to break it. And civil society and scholars, people shouldn't be threatened to show up and speak at conferences or to participate in a webinar, to the best kind of decisions are well-informed decisions, which take in feedback from many different diverse voices. So I think it's incumbent on the academic community, civil society, political parties, et cetera, to just break down walls and come together in the name of the future of the country. And those who don't are not part of the solution, and are showing a different color, really a different side to their intentions. Anyone that cares about Ethiopia should be able to come together easily to discuss and to generate ideas and to contribute to those ideas on what's best for the country. I think the other thing that we shouldn't be underestimating is the US midterm elections and the constituencies that are being catered for here. Some constituencies which come with a bit of a bulging pocketbook as well, and what's already in place, what's solidified. And, that drives decisions that, my stomach did turn when I was listening to a Senate briefing. Was it Senator Menendez? And just not even the correct pronunciation of Tigray and Tigrayans. And, all of a sudden there were tigers in the room and Tigerians. And this is a sort of thing that's not endearing people to the relationship. Elias spoke about Syria. Now let's think about what Syria looks like. 20 years of bloody conflict that has caused so much human suffering, that involves Iran, Russia, Iraq, the United States, Israel, and of course Hezbollah and the different and Daesh forces, as well as the Sunni rebels. This is a proxy battle space, and look how it has been left. Even after 20 years, which we've just recently marked the date of. We don't want that to resonate in any way. And in fact, we want to do everything we can to help the Syrian people make that better. And we don't want those sorts of bad decisions to come anywhere near the Horn of Africa. So I think reasonable voices need to be brought into this, and perhaps outside the box thinking on solutions. I mentioned the Northern Ireland model earlier on. I'm not suggesting that it gets transposed to the Horn, but there is some utility in using an independent commission led by a well-respected commissioner. Former military worked very well in that case, because military in most countries should be nonpartisan and professional in their approach. Investigations need to be professionalized as well. And I think once you can show that you're taking a very professional approach, using forensics, et cetera, to investigations, you'll get more support for those investigations. And I think that, countries like Canada and voices perhaps from different parts of Scandinavia, and those that have not been so prominent in the debate to date, but who can actually make a real contribution because they have done in the region in the past, and the UK included. We need to have other voices that are becoming prominent, and not just the US narrative to be dominant. And then as far as the use of force is concerned, we all said NATO in Africa when it came to Libya. We thought, no, Article 5 is all about the member states. An attack against one is an attack against all. But there's all sorts of clauses that allow for those interests and interests with partners to be protected. But this, I still stand by my view that this is highly unlikely, and that would be really crossing red lines, I think, to bring NATO to be involved in the region. The US and partners should be very concerned about what destabilization would do to the peace already galvanized in the region. And there were a few comments in the chat on this. Ethiopia would have to pull troops from Abyei, troops from Somalia, troops from the Congo. You know, it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, contributors to international peacekeeping. But with further disability on national soil, they need all the security capacity they can. So there's lots at stake here. And the next move is the vital move. So propping up the capacity for strategic comms, for diplomacy, for investigations, for investing in restoring that trust with partners is critical to make sure that next move steers in the right direction.
To dovetail what Anne said, let me add one more concern I have, and even insight. When Emperor Theodorus imprisoned the prisoners, imprisoned the British citizens in Ethiopia and Magdala, the British Empire at that time galvanized its military from around the world and descended on Ethiopia, ending up not only in his death and the death of hundreds and thousands, but also they looted everything. They looted our books, they looted our historical archives, they looted our historical relics. And the NATO involvement with Ethiopia, what would be the entry point into that? When one member gets attacked, then the others will come. Okay, so let's take as an example, this is just one fear I have. When you read the statement that Blinken gave us, he says, we will never hesitate to use force when American lives and vital interests are at stake. Okay, they have been screaming and they have been pushing their humanitarian workers into the war zone. And we have seen a video when they were actually asked to stop. They were just passing from one section to the other. So if something happened tomorrow, this is an idea that we need to entertain. And so a car full of humanitarian workers, that some of them might be from Los Angeles or New York, who went there to do good in the world. Let's assume that they get ambushed and maybe in the crossfire dies, and all that will be recorded, and then we'll see it on CNN. And will that really open up the country to be invaded with this mighty force that has been waiting for you to eat you? And I think those are the kind of scenarios that we have to be carefully examine and warn ourselves. And the famine scenario that is being put out, we talked about it earlier, but this happened in the past. And with this kind of scenarios, we have seen the consequences and how Ethiopia was devastated, not only within, but also that Ethiopia was wiped out of the social memory of everyone who knew Ethiopia's glory and Ethiopia's history as what it is. But the consequence of that has created the Ethiopia that we lived under the last 30 years. And we're trying to come out of it as people, as nations. This doesn't exclude anyone. Every Ethiopian in it is a part of that legacy. And so the war in Tigray needs to stop, need to be reconciled, and we need to find some way of, yes, the TPLF is a terrorist organization, and we have a proven record of what they were able to do, what they did in the past 27 years. The government is not willing to negotiate with them, I understand that, but the Tigrayan elites in business, in academia, in religion, and in the different social strata needs to come out, and they have to be the voice and instrument of peace for their people, for their community in Ethiopia. If they fail to do this, and I think the worst devastation that we have never seen before will ensue in Ethiopia. Let me add another issue here. When after the American attack happened in Iraq, there was this reports that started to come. In Syria, we have seen the same thing, that these historical relics were looted. Actually, there was one incident I remember that a librarian was showing the cameraman in the news that she was showing him the library. And she said that whoever came and looted this library, she said that they know exactly which book to take. These are not unprofessionals but immediately the attack happens, they came in and took the most important historical documents that the nation had. And there is no historical place than Tigray for Ethiopia. That's where we have the Garima books and so many thousands of books. I care for our people there. I care about our heritage. I care about the books that we have there. And so the only people who can have the senses and who can be able to come and start that negotiation, that conversation, is not the TPLF. The TPLF is gone. I don't think that will be a way into the conversation with the TPLF in mind. Let's avoid the TPLFs, but at the same time, let's focus on the Tigrayan elites, the Tigrayan leaders, the community leaders that we have. Some of them are my friends, and they need to stand together. And their former TPLF or affiliates, even they're a member of TPLF who are not a part of this criminal group. So those people need to come and find some kind of common grounds to sit down and talk to the Ethiopian government so that we can be able to solve this problem. Otherwise, the current engagement that we are pursuing is not going to take us anywhere. But we will wake up another Libya, we will wake up another Iraq, we will wake up another Syria. And that's my nightmare scenario that I don't want even to think about. And the world is not helping us. And John Spencer, in this book, Ethiopia at Bay, he talks about the Second World War and the players in it, and the story starts. The book starts in a fable that he tells, and it's an Ethiopian fable. And it's the cheetah and the lion and start to walk with an oryx. And so they were making it like, let's confess, we're friends, there's no secrets among us, let's confess. And so the lion said, I ate some animal, and that's, and you're forgiven, the cheetah tells them. And the lioness asked the cheetah to tell his version of the story. And he said, one day I was angry, and we were, and I saw this animal, and I, jumped and ate it. And the oryx, didn't have anything. Actually, he couldn't say a word. And they encouraged him. He said, "Oh no, there's no secrets among friends. Tell us what you feel, what you see. Just your secrets." And so the oryx thinks about it and tell a story. And he said, "I was in the desert walking, and one day I saw this grass in it, and I went ahead, ate it." And so the lion and the cheetah were very, very angry, and they said, "How dare you?" Actually, they said that you have committed an unparalleled crime and do not deserve to live. And both of them devoured it. This is Ethiopian history in the when Italy invaded Ethiopia. That's how the Brits and the French went against Ethiopia. And currently, how the EU is behaving, how the US is behaving, and of course NATO is a part of them. So it reminds me of our history that we have been ignoring. I don't think if Dr. Abiy or the Ethiopian government would feel that the American government will betray them as they did in the Nile negotiation, they wouldn't allow them to come in, because it was an African negotiation that was taking place. That was a mistake that he would leave to regret. But at the same time, Dr. Abiy also had another thing for him, which is that different from Haile Selassie, he woke up to the reality of his surroundings early on. So he has an opportunity to fix how he deals with it in going forward. And as Anne said, that we heard what Meles Zenawi did when he invaded Somalia, and when he did many things. We know that he had support behind him, but at the same time, Ethiopia is in a crossroad. That crossroad needs to be carefully navigated, and this is the time when the Africans, the African American community needs to wake up and see what is happening, what is coming to Ethiopia is not going to stop in Ethiopia as it did before. It's a larger, it has to be seen in the larger context of global sphere expansion. And so there's no magic wand to it, but we need to jump and join our brothers and sisters to find a solution, as all this reactionary actions in our community is important, but we need to be active towards the peace that needs to be implemented.
A couple of questions. Speaking of there are key elements that you raised, both Anne and you, with respect to, it's just all over deja vu. It looks like it's just kind of deja vu, and we are just basically waking up to this crazy reality, which I don't want to fathom. But at an age of Black Lives Matter, we are at that stage whereby there's a lot of these movements that are happening. However, when you look at black skin, white masks, Frantz Fanon's book seem to be at play. When you look at our own sisters like Nima, Sudanese sister, Nima Elbeger, CNN correspondent, Karen Bass, and Rice for that matter. When you look at that, how do we kind of navigate that? And at the same time, how do we also create that black solidarity? I know if Ethiopia being attacked, quote unquote, there are 50 plus other countries that also become, behind us. I know for sure for that. So I don't want the United States or any other country to think that they can, it's going to be just like Libya, because Ethiopia is a significant country. It's not just because I'm from there, but they need to also look at that. So in this sense, I know we're going to move to the last session after this, in this Black Lives Matter day and age, how do we foster that alliance and enhance that critical consciousness, and then bring together and fight this foreseeable disastrous outcome? What do you guys think?
If we learn anything from our human history, this is beyond our color of our the skin color. It's the issue of humanity. The worst part of this debacle that we find ourselves is that how the story is being told is that Ethiopians are killing their own citizens. Ethiopian government is killing the Tigrayans, or the Tigrayans are being killed by the Eritreans. These are, brothers and sisters. This is the same family that we're talking about. So that makes this argument a little bit dodgy. Even you can't be able to see it as such. But as Anne will speak on this also. But when you think about the foreign countries, the European countries, when we're talking about, or the Americans, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter within, and then now we go and attack another country, but the leader of that attack from the American sides are black skins. That's what you're referring, Frantz Fanon, I'm assuming. So if you assume that the black leader of the United States in Barack Obama cares for Africa, what he was able to do, or what he did, what happened in America in his time, to African countries, especially to Ethiopia, was abhorrent. Absolutely. But he didn't do it as a black person. He did it as a president of the United States. This is the guy who went to Ethiopia and told us that Ethiopia's democracy is exemplar. This is the guy who came out in a session when Meles Zenawi was defending actually Africans' right to farm, but Obama came and said that the food security is important. More important than the democratization process, that he himself said that he would support in his speech in Ghana. This is the black man who came to start the war in Libya, who later on in 2016 came out and said that Libya aftermath is the worst mistake of my presidency. So if we believe, if we trust color, skin matters, I think, will be in this equation. But it's not going to be. It's not going to save us. I think one thing that I would say in this regard is that the people of the continent of Africa needs to be scared. And especially what we have seen in the Kenyan's government handling of the issues in Ethiopia, the Djiboutian president's handling of the situation in Ethiopia. Of course, the Sudanese government handling of this in the weakest moment of our history, how they betrayed this relationship. These are the things that we need to be able to, we need to refocus and be able to navigate. And really, there definitely will be mistakes by Ethiopian government, as I have said in the past, that the Ethiopian government is 3 years old. These people were trying to really, it's a very young administration, and they were trying to bring everyone from outside, even within even the prisoners or even the exile. So they're trying to really patch up the things and go through with it. After saying this, is that there's no excuse. They are the helm of power. They have to find people who can help them and just fix these issues and go further. But at the same time, the people of Africa needs to wake up and see. And the other thing is that as much as possible, we have to solve the internal problems that we have within Ethiopia. That's one. But the second one is that our relationships with our neighbors, which really scared the heck out of the American or the imperial system that currently holds when Dr. Abiy went to this regional powers and made that kind of realignment in the beginning of his administration, the first 6 months of his administration. That was admirable. But at the same time, what happened since then needs to be able to wake us up so that we can be able to find a common ground in our humanity and relate and solve our issues together.
I think Black Lives Matter is a fundamental part of our core values, and it's in our national interests as nation states to project and defend and pursue and promote our values. And human rights and fundamental freedoms are relevant here. So national security is all about using instruments of power to protect those values and national interests. And we're living not even a decade, a century, where national security threats, issues, trends are all, transboundary in nature. So domestic security, there's a blurred distinction between what we mean by domestic security and international security interests. And I say that as a backdrop to the point that I wish to make about an issue like Black Lives Matter and an agenda and a campaign. We need to be able to promote this vis-a-vis our international issues abroad, as well as our domestic agenda. And, our African political thought leaders, communities are no different to their Afro-American counterparts. And so we need to show that Black Lives Matter in Africa throughout. And I say this also in the context of what is at stake in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment with these harsh policies. Already instability and tensions will tip Ethiopia backwards a number of years. But economic sanctions and measures that are being discussed on the margins concerning intervention will potentially descend countries back into a downward spiral of poverty and conflict. And so we need to make sure that the values that we're so committed to here in places like North America and in Europe and in the West are equally applied close to home and far away from home, where our policies are having traction on the ground.
We would like to wrap up our session with a couple of forward-looking questions. And I would like to get your perspective on two critical issues in terms of what Ethiopia should be doing. In particular, following on Elias's call for Tigrayan elites to be the voice of for the people of Tigray for peace and reconciliation. I would like to raise a point that some critics call the uncomfortable truth about TPLF's deep-rooted support among Tigrayans, both in Tigray and in the diaspora community. They basically argue even Tigrayan political elites and activists who were opposed to TPLF until the conflict have sort of coalesced into a monolithic group supporting TPLF at this juncture. So is this really realistic for Ethiopia to continue its current strategy and be able to achieve a lasting peace? And especially given the track record of our government, which to date, which was never able to curb intercommunal violence throughout the country. Isn't there a danger of endless and prolonged violence like Afghanistan, unless there is a shift towards some kind of political settlement? Can we afford to exclude negotiation 100%? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is moving forward again, given the fact that the election is taking place in this complex conflict environment and the legacy of ethnic federalism and authoritarian repressive practices of TPLF in the past. What should the incoming government and opposition parties and people do to facilitate peace and reconciliation in the country in general?
If the government is not willing to talk to the terrorist organization, and if that terrorist organization is defeated, and the leaders that we know, most of the leaders that we know of are killed, or some of them are in hiding. Okay, so these people cannot come out of their hiding and represent the organization. And even for that to happen, the Tigrayan elite should not be a bystanders and on opposition figures from outside. They have to sit down and create some kind of a path. We call it Yamariam Mangat. When you find that very narrow entry into that debate and that conversation, I think they should take it, and the Ethiopian government should allow for that kind of conversation to be had. And then the other scenario is that Ethiopia will descend into a scenario where the international forces will come in. That's not going to help anyone. Or even the local matters will descend, like we have witnessed in our lifetime, the war between the Derg and the TPLF, and how long it took for a change to come. And even within that 17 years of war in Tigray region, how it devastated the human loss that the Tigrayan region has experienced was devastating, including the drought and the war itself. And I don't think that the Tigray population still recovers from it. But at the same time, we are adding another layer of that similar kind of to what end is the question. And so that's why I think we need to find a way to for the Ethiopian government to open up a way of communication with the Tigrayan elites, and the Tigrayan elites, as diverse as they are, with different point of view and support to the TPLF or against it, they need to come together and rescue their people in that region. And I think that's the most important thing that I would like to add in here, and maybe Anne would add to this point.
No, I think I totally agree with you, Elias, about your point about the discussions with the elites. And I think this is happening to a certain extent with the Ministry of Peace dialogue process. It's focused on two categories, if I remember correctly, the elites and the community-based dialogue. So I think it'd be really useful to get a really good update on that dialogue and what the challenges are, and maybe look at other dialogue processes around the world and research to help inform what could be some helpful next steps to reinforce it. You know, Kosovo, a million miles away in many ways, shapes, and forms, but very, very productive dialogue process that included, you know, putting facilitators on a bus and taking them to every single village and community in the whole region. Then everybody feels included, on board, part of the process, and it was it brought trust to a new level. I do think, as well as the in-country elites, international civil society has to come together as well, because that's what's influencing the media. And it's their articles, their research, etc., that is polarized and needs to come together as well. And so, and the diaspora plays a very important role. You know, there's probably some views of the Ethiopians in Ethiopia towards the diaspora who might come in and out periodically or perhaps rarely. But a real meaningful connection, I think, could be made between the diaspora groups, and there are ways and means out there that facilitate that, and to participate productively in that would be another channel of future resilience, let's call it. So collectively, I mean, there's no shortage of volume of people here, right? To collectively come together en masse and stand en masse with some potential solutions ahead could really help sway public opinion out there, help inform better policies. And, you know, rule of law, let's not forget all the millions that governments like the United States put into developing Ethiopia's rule of law system and justice system. Let it play out. Let it have faith in it. You know, this denigration of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission after support of the donors for good governance and transparency and accountability drove organs like that to be transformed into independent organs. If we're not going to accept them and let their processes progress, then it's a bit hypocritical in my view. So yeah, I think there's some barriers in place at the moment on different levels, and I think it takes bravery and courage to break these barriers down, and that might steer the ship in a different direction, hopefully. Thank you.
You guys have touched really great points. Of course, one of the biggest challenges, as you guys talked about, elite consensus is the biggest challenge within our country. I throughout the time I've noticed, because Ethiopian people are there is no way you can separate them. The chastity that has been built for millennia, it has created such a depth of connectivity, even though the last 30 plus years have been eroded that social fabric. Thankfully, that has sustained us this far. Moving forward, my point is we need to heal. We need to heal from the intergenerational trauma that has been transferred from, for 50, 60 years ago, as Elias, you try to highlight. Our politicians, our leaders, I believe, especially about 50 years, I have this theory that they're traumatized, they're wounded, their mental state is completely obliterated because of the violence they experienced through the struggle and through that. I'm not sure they understand that the magnitude of that impact. So collectively, we need to break this cycle of violence and this cycle of trauma that has, creating this vicious cycle. So in order to heal, we need to break that. In order to move forward, we need to reconcile. So those things are very critical, as you said. We do have great indigenous knowledge that peace building, in fact, I don't like peace building because it's just a Western notion. We have already peace because our peace is like the way we live, right? With harmonious aspects. So if we can inject that into our system, our education, all these things, and bring back our we call it Shimagile, fathers and elders, we will definitely prevail. But the thing is, we need to set up that structure. With the ethnic federalism policy, I don't see that can be materialized, because the essence of ethnic federalism policy, as we have time and again talked about, is to dismantle Ethiopia in that way of destroying that social fabric. And it ended up, we are here now because of that policy. So what would you guys recommend?
Well, I think an investment has to be made in it, first of all. And the international community is not good at this. We've got tools on a spectrum that are, many of which are outdated and not relevant to a lot of the democratic transitions going forward. And we're going to see more of these transitions, right? Leaders elsewhere are aging. They've been in power for ages. Their precedents are being set in different parts of the world. And pressure is going to be on the international community to put their money where their mouth is in terms of rule-based order and promoting democracy. Because once a new leader comes into power, and we saw this with Aung San Suu Kyi as well in Myanmar, things get messy, international community stands back because it only has tools to support or condemn or on the diplomatic end, or harsh measures like economic sanctions and sending forces in. And that creates human suffering. So we have to work in that middle ground where mediation, political reconciliation. I remember working for Thabo Mbeki for a while on the high implementation panel. And it was extraordinary for such an important undertaking as Mbeki was being supported to do. Begging bowls had to be taken out every time there was a set of talks or dialogue, because it wasn't a big thing that the international community invested in. So we need to have tools that support dialogue at the elite level, at the community level, lessons learned, good practice, ways of acknowledging things, ways of recording things, ways of forgiving, etc. And I think as far as federalism is concerned, we can draw on good practice there as well. There's no reason why federalism can't work in Ethiopia. There's such a thing called asymmetric federalism. We have it here in Canada. Look at Quebec and the laws that it has, completely different to many of the laws in other provinces. The West has different, and we are very politically divided, right? In fact, Canada has never been so politically divided as it is now. And lastly, we are the most, well, Toronto, where I think some of you are calling in from, is the most multicultural city in the world. And it's not even a capital city. It's not even a federal capital. It's a provincial capital. So, you only need to look to Canada and a few other countries to see how, not so much the outcome of federalist process, but the processes to get to the outcome. Because we're so multicultural and diverse, we are a country that is good at striving for the highest common outcome instead of the lowest common denominator, because we need to make sure everybody is represented and supported. Yes, we've made mistakes. We've had a checkered past on dealing with Indigenous groups across this country, residential school issues, etc. But apologies have been issued, acknowledgements have been made, and the country is trying its best to come together and act on it, because it is a matter of vital importance. So being able to come together as a country when it needs to, which is now, but being able to work in a very asymmetrically managed way is possible. And I think looking at good practice elsewhere, bringing in different voices that can help with that, and not being afraid to ask for help are all really important.
Ethiopia as a nation, Ethiopians as citizens of that country, need to reconcile with, we need to reconcile with our history. And that means that the most important apologies, acknowledgements need to be made for to our past historical transgression, to the current debacles that we witness, induced or our own making. We are committing crimes one way or another. No one can be spared from this, be it the political leaders, opposition, or the leading government officials. We need to heal. We need to find a way to reconcile with that. The seed of discontent that was sown in the past 30 years didn't mushroom because the guys were evil. No, it was there. It was there. Some of the issues that we have had, I mean, one of the greatest thing about Ethiopian history is that it's one of the oldest nation states in the world. With it comes many years of good things and many bad things that was created by different leaders or interests, for that matter, and our alignment or disalignment with international players in every time has worsened those facts. So as a nation, I think we all need to understand that predicament that we find ourselves in. With acceptance of that, I know the Minister of Peace, I have attended one presentation in which that I have seen one of the speakers, scholar, professor at the university, talking about the many indigenous peace building initiatives that the government is trying to reset. But one thing that we have to remember is that for the last 30 years, we have actually for the last 50 plus years that we have destroyed our elder system. The first place actually that was destroyed is in Tigray. The elderly, the people that we have had the respect and reverence and the wisdom of sage minds were reduced into one rebel leader could order the guy, you know, our community leaders as if they were nobody. And so those we have to reconstitute that, but that's going to take time. Until that needs to happen, I think our scholars need to go and dig and find not only in stories as it was done in the past 30 years, not story that makes my ethnic groups bigger than you or show the victimization that my ethnic groups went through, but the common threads that connects us and what I played in that in the bigger national fabric that makes us who we are. And I think if we be able to refigure that, and it's going to take time, it's not there's no an easy quick fix. We will repeat the same mistake if we go that route. It's going to take time, but within that confinement that we find ourselves, there are many indigenous or solutions that we have seen, especially to reconcile countries in the East European countries that we have seen in South America, that there are examples that we can replicate. The South Africa example, there are some things that we can take from it. It's not 100%, but there are things. The Rwanda experience was another one. So we didn't get, we have, as Fisaha earlier mentioned, that we have stratified agony, this stratified tragedy that we endure, that we're not even speaking on it. We're not even exorcised it. So we need to exorcise those demons that we live with, those anguish, those anger, those crimes that we endured, be it by the governments in power for the last 3 or 4 governments, be it in our local leaders, be it by our community engagement. So we need to be able to heal, to go forward. We need to reconcile, and we need to sympathize and empathize. That's a very, very important thing. We need to empathize with our brothers whose family are in the crossfire. So we need to empathize with these people because they're going through this, anguish. And we have to help them. Normally in the Ethiopian traditional ways that when somebody dies, you go and sit with them and reconcile them. We cry with them, we empathize with them. But in this war, we find ourselves here and there, and that distance is not going to help us. We are Ethiopians. The most important thing that we have to understand is that all the differences that we are witnessing, because this is the most important thing, is that while two brothers are killing each other, the mother is not going to have a hero in the winner. She's going to be the loser in whatever context that you can find. So this battle or this skirmish that is happening in Ethiopia, it needs to be seen as such. So with that, I think the reconciliation has to begin, if it is not already. We need to go across the streets and embrace our brothers. Whatever differences that we may have, we can solve it. But the only way that we can do that is by listening the other person. And I think the government is making some headways in some ways, but there are many lacking, and we need to push for that changes to happen within the government. And I know, when you finish one, there's an election, there's another, there are many issues that are really piling up. So we shouldn't wait for the government to do everything. I think we should be able to, as individuals, we need to be able to go across the street and start that conversation. And I think that is, especially those of us who are in the diaspora, have a responsibility and the ability to do this, because we are far away from the conflict zones. And we need to start that.
I am so thankful that you were able to join us, both of you. Such a wonderful and insightful discussion. And thank you for making it, Elias. And I really, really appreciate. And yeah, before we need collective healing. So with that, I just want to say thank you, folks. There you have it. Petros, if you have the last word, please.
Really nothing to add. Thank you. It has been an honor and a privilege truly to participate in this conversation. And hopefully we'll continue to have such conversations as part of, the reconciliation process begins with sharing ideas and, discussing on solutions. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your insight into this very complex problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We hope we'll see you in the future with other sessions.